Shavua Tov, a good vach. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Wishing you a good week. We are starting our week right here Saturday night, Motzi Shabbos, by doing a little beautiful learning together. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us as we gather to do some learning on a Saturday night? Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Rebecca in LA, Bill in Missouri. Glad for autumn so I can make Saturday classes again. Exactly. Shabbos is ending earlier and earlier. I was just looking at the schedule. It's going to get down to like 6 p.m. that it ends. And so hopefully I can even get on the air, by like 7. And then in November, it drops an hour, right? And then it's going to end like at 5 something. And then in the winter, it'll be much easier to learn on Saturday nights together if you're on the East Coast or even in Europe. Belle in Texas, Paula in the Great Northwest, Christo in Lubbock, almost done with another tractate of the Bavli. Yes, we are holding on Beitzah, 8th volume of the Talmud, the Laws of Festivals, and tonight we're going to be doing page 32, and I believe this tractate has 40 pages, so we're almost in the last week. Paula says, Shalom, Francisco in California, Brandon in Knoxville. I'm getting married this week. Mazel tov, Brandon. That's beautiful. May you and your wife have many years of fulfillment and joy and health and happiness together, each of you to 120 if you happen to be the same age. And we wish you only the best, and may everything happen at the right time in the right way. Rick in Colorado, everyone wishing Brandon a mazel tov. Beautiful, I love it. Over there on the YouTube side, Ela in Ocala, Florida. Welcome, welcome. Okay. Just wanted to share, first of all, that nigun by Eitan Katz that was playing during the warm-up music. If you're tuning in late, maybe after the show's over, go back and hear it. Beautiful, haunting nigun. And I never heard the story. What's it called, the nigun? Gam Ki Elech. And he wrote that. It came to him in a dream in around 2002, 2003, which was a very bad time for the Jewish people in Israel in particular. There were a lot of terrorist attacks, Jews being killed because they're Jews. And one particular case was just, every case is tragic. I mean, how do you distinguish one from another in terms of its level of tragedy? But in this one case, a father and his daughter were both murdered by terrorists just before she was going to get married, right before her wedding. And Eitan Katz was a student in yeshiva at that time in Maryland, and he just couldn't understand it. He just found himself unable to learn, unable to study, crying in the Beis Midrash, and just went to sleep that night and had a dream in which this father was walking his daughter down the aisle to her chuppah, to the wedding canopy, and this tune was playing in the background that he'd never heard before. And he woke up and quickly grabbed a tape recorder and recorded it and brought it down into the world. And that's that nigun, Gam Ki Elech. Haunting. A haunting tune. Just wanted to share also beautiful teaching. We started the new cycle of Torah portions this year. And as I mentioned yesterday, so much happened so quickly. And like the very first parsha, the very first Torah portion, from the creation of the world all the way to the Adam and Eve story, the Garden of Eden, ejection from the Garden of Eden, and the Cain and Abel story. And turn off that air conditioning. And all the generations, including, Methuselah and all these long-lived people, and God deciding that people wouldn't live so long anymore, and then to the birth of Noah. And then Noah will be the subject of next week's Torah portion. So much happens in this first Torah portion. And I blessed us all that we should take a little time and dwell on each of these stories. I mean, very important teaching to me is God says first to the fish and the fowl, the fish and the birds, and then again to the other animals. And it's the first commandment in the Torah, be fruitful and multiply. If that only meant reproduce your kind, it would have been enough to say multiply. Be fruitful is a command for us to do that which we were sent into the world to do, right? Our soul's mission to try to figure out what that is and to do it. In my opinion, that's what it means to be fruitful. From Rav Yekusiel, our rabbi in Armenian today, he talked about this moment when after Adam and Eve have eaten from, broken the one commandment that they were given. You can eat from every tree, but don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And they do, and then after they do, they become ashamed of themselves. And God is then, the presence of God comes through the garden. And they're hiding from God because they realize they're naked, and God says, "Where are you?" Ayeka in Hebrew. And it's a very strange question. God knows everything. Why would God say to them, "Where are you?" In fact, the Balatanya, also known as the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, was once imprisoned on trumped-up charges. He was a spiritual leader thrown in prison by the Tsar's army. And while he was in prison, this Russian judge came to him and asked him this very question, right? Why would God say, "Where are you?" Right? God knows. And the Balatanya answered, he's not asking so that God can find out where Adam and Eve are. God is asking so that they would consider where they themselves are. What does this mean to us? So there's this idea, sometimes stated as original sin. And by the way, this is not a Christian concept in the sense that many Jewish commentators over the centuries have said that, that the original state of Adam Rishon, right, of the first humans, Adam and Hava, Adam and Eve, was a pure spiritual state. The Talmud, in fact, teaches that how tall was Adam. I mean, he was measured in like galactic terms, cosmic terms. He was as big as the sky or much bigger. And when they became, this other kind of human capable of good and evil, a human that would also be mortal and would be subject to dying, that was the punishment. If you eat of that tree, you shall die. Well, he didn't die on that day, right? Adam lived to 930 years, but he became subject to death. So the nature of the humans was changed in that moment. Now, was it a setup? Is that what God expected? Perhaps. So then, if God expected us to be who we are, humans, fallible, capable of making mistakes, capable of evil in great measure, the small evils, the small sins that we do, then why create us in that original spiritual state and then doom us to fall from it so that we would feel guilt for the rest of our lives? And the idea is we shouldn't be feeling guilt all the rest of our lives. God was saying to Adam and Eve after they've done this, "Where are you?" Meaning, where are you holding? Now, that's a response, almost predicting what Adam is going to say. Because when God gets this explanation from them, and Adam says, "The woman told me to eat and I ate," right? And that's normally translated as "I ate." But the Hebrew, va'ochel, actually means "I will eat." I ate and I will eat, right? And so there's this tragic, even before they're banished from the garden, even before anything else has happened, Adam says, "Oh, now I see why you didn't want me to do that, because now I am a person who sins, and I'm doomed to keep sinning." Right? But what God is actually telling him right at the outset with Ayeka is, where are you putting your consciousness? Right? Because that original state, we may not be able to go back into the Garden of Eden and live there and, just while away the hours eating all the beautiful fruits except for the fruit from one tree. Now we're creatures who work for a living, who make choices, who make bad choices. But even before we were created, the Talmud also teaches that before the world was created, before the universe was created, before there was even light and dark, etc., the 6 days of creation, before any of that was created, the Torah was created and Teshuvah was created. Atonement was created. So the fact that atonement was created before the world was created indicates that God expected that atonement would be needed. And atonement is available, right? So it depends where we put our consciousness. If we encounter a very difficult event and we feel fear, that's normal. It is normal to feel fear. There's a lot of terrifying things. We can even be afraid of what we might do and that we might make bad choices again. That's healthy. Shame, right? If we wallow in shame, if we let shame kind of fill up our identity, shame means that I identify my worst days and my worst actions with my inner core. That's who I am. I sinned, I will always be a sinner. Right? Identifying a person with the worst thing they've ever done and that actually sums it up, that's who they are, right? I mean, that's a lot of what cancel culture is about these days. Somebody said something, did something, whatever else they may have said or done in their lives, unimportant, irrelevant, let's just label them by the worst thing they've ever done. That is not what our sages teach, and that's not what God teaches. You may have fallen, you may have made terrible mistakes. You will be held accountable for those mistakes. You will have to pay for those mistakes. You need to make an atonement for those mistakes. But you can place your consciousness and your aspirations in the original being that you are. We are all descendants of a being that was created from light. I mean, and from the dirt, the combination of light and dirt, really. That's what it is, a soul placed into a body created in this world. And just as Adam committed errors, we commit errors. But just as Adam was originally a divine spiritual creature, so are we, because we are souls, right? Everyone who is a soul, and that's every human, shares that quality with Adam. So we fall, we get back up again. We pay for our misdeeds, but we don't identify ourselves as the worst of what we've done. We identify ourselves as the beautiful souls we've been sent into this world to try and do the best we can, in our bodies. But we are souls. Let's remember that. Okay. As I mentioned, we're holding on page 32 here in Tractate Beitzah. And we are in chapter 4, and we're discussing more closely. This is all about what's permissible and what's impermissible and what's prohibited on a festival, often as distinguished to Shabbos. And as we've been talking about, basically it's all the same laws, basically, on Shabbos as on festivals, except that on festivals we can cook. And once you can cook and make food, so other activities related to cooking are also going to be permitted, but only up to a certain point, right? And so, for example, we learn you can't chop wood on a festival, even though you mean to use that wood in your, wood-burning oven to cook food, because the wood should have been chopped before the festival. If you absolutely don't have any wood, okay, they'll let you cut up some wood, but not in the normal way of cutting it up with an axe as you would on the week. You're going to use your kitchen knife to cut some wood, just what you need, and certainly no more than what you need for, what you might use after the festival ends. But much better, anything that can be done before the festival, that's the way it should be done. Okay, we continue to conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 4. Let's say you don't have wood, right? There's no wood available, but you have wooden bowls. Could you burn your wooden bowls in order to create a fire to cook some food? It's taught in a Beitzah, on a festival, one may kindle fire with vessels, but one may not kindle fire with shards of vessels. Can you imagine why? It's almost like you'd think the opposite, right? if the wooden bowl had broken into pieces, so that would make sense. Like that's what you'd want to burn now that you need a fire. But if the wood bowl is whole, they're saying that you can burn, the pieces you can't. And the reason is because keep coming back to this concept of muktzah. What is prepared for use on the festival and what isn't. If it wasn't prepared for use, it's set aside and we can't use it on the festival. So these shards of the wood bowl, unless you had consciously thought, oh, I can now use these as kindling and put them in your basket of kindling wood. If it was just a broken bowl, what you thought was going to happen to it on the festival is nothing, right? It had no use. It's a broken vessel. You weren't going to put your salad in it because it's broken. It won't hold the salad. So it was really just kind of trash, and it certainly wasn't prepared for use on the festival. On the other hand, your wood salad bowl, you thought you might use it on the festival like any kitchen vessel, any kitchen utensil. Now that you need to burn some wood, so you could use that bowl, according to this opinion. And it is taught in another Beitzah, one may kindle fire with both with vessels and with shards of vessels, right? So now here's a second opinion that says, no, you can actually use the shards also. And then there's a third Beitzah that says one may kindle a fire neither with vessels nor with the shards of vessels. Okay, so now we have three Beitzahs that say three completely different things, all contradicting each other. First of all, how can there be three such contradictory opinions? Clearly, they're going to be opinions of different people, or perhaps they were issued in different situations. And the Gemara explains. And this contradiction between these Beitzahs is resolved in the following manner. La kasha, it is not difficult. This first Beitzah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who accepts the law of muktzah. He says things that are not prepared for use on the festival can't be used on the festival. So that's the first explanation that I gave you. The wood bowl was prepared, it can be used in the fire. The shards were not prepared for use, they're muktzah, they can't be touched. One may therefore kindle fire with vessels as they are not muktzah, but with the shards of vessels, they are muktzah, and so they cannot be handled. The second Beitzah, which says one may kindle a fire both with vessels and shards of vessels, this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who does not accept the law of muktzah. According to him, one may use shards of vessels as well. And the third one that prohibits using even vessels that are intact is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah, who allows vessels to be used only for their designated purpose. Was that wood bowl prepared for use on the festival? Sure. To hold salad, not to become fuel for your fire in the oven. Since that's not a purpose that you had in mind before the festival, you can't use it on the festival for that purpose. That's according to the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. And the Gemara replies, these are two Tanaim, two rabbis of the Mishnaic period, who both hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. Two later Tanaim disagreed with each other in reporting the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. Both agree that one may use vessels only for their designated purpose, but they disagree with regard to whether this law applies only on Shabbos or on festivals as well. So what is the law? Kindling with vessels and their shards. One may not kindle fire on a festival with shards of vessels if they are no longer fit for their original use. And this is because they are considered nolad. One may use whole vessels. So this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds by muktzah, and the law, and we hold by muktzah. There are items that because they have no legitimate use and weren't designated for use on the festival, no one had in mind that they would be used in this way on the festival, they're set aside and can't be used on the festival. The bowl was prepared for use on the festival, and it's okay to use it for a different purpose as long as it's a permitted purpose, and in this case, creating a fire to cook food on a festival is permitted. If one did kindle fire with whole vessels, he must be careful not to turn them over after lighting them. Once lit, they are considered shards of vessels unless one places prepared wood on top of them, right? Once they're burning, now they're like pieces of vessels that have come into being during the festival, and that makes them nolad, and you can't touch them. They can keep burning, but you can't stir them up. And these rulings apply to a situation in which one needs to kindle a fire but does not have sufficient wood. Otherwise, it is prohibited to burn vessels, even on a weekday, due to the prohibition against wasting. Isn't that interesting, right? A wood bowl, you shouldn't toss it into a fire. Because that's just waste. Now, the laws of wasting, there's a lot more to them. It's not just a blanket statement. You can't throw things out that could still be used. Okay, but suffice it to say, for now, that the sages don't like when things, that still have a utility in this world are thrown out. I think they would go insane in today's consumerist culture, which is all about throwing things out that are still useful. But we'll put that aside for another day when we come to that concept. Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 4 of Tractate Beitzah. On a festival, one may not hollow out a piece of clay to form a lamp into which he will place oil and a wick, because he thereby creates a vessel. So remember, what is a lamp in ancient times? It's some kind of oil lamp, meaning it's some kind of a vessel. I mean, you can imagine like a genie's lamp, like in the movie Aladdin. That was a typical shape for a lamp, but it doesn't have to be that complicated. It could just be a bowl that you put oil in and something that's going to keep the wick in its place, floating at the top and burning. That's it, right? A wick holder, oil, and a vessel. Let's say you didn't have an oil lamp. Let's say you had an earthenware oil lamp, right, made of hardened clay. Fired clay, and it broke, and now you have no light. Okay, well, you need something to make an oil lamp out of. You need a vessel. Now imagine you have some soft clay lying around. Oh, great. So because clay, actually, you could pretty easily make a bowl out of it, put some oil into it. It's still soft. It's not hard like, fired earthenware, but it would hold the oil, it would hold the wick, and you could, make a lamp out of it. Why can't you do that on a festival? You need a lamp on the festival to enjoy the festival, but you can't create a new vessel, right? You're manufacturing a new vessel. So the Mishnah says you can't do that. And similarly, one may not produce charcoal at all on a festival because this is not labor for sustenance. And similarly, one may not cut the wick, as this is considered mending a vessel. Like the wick is too long, you're going to cut it. No, but now you're preparing it for use, and you're doing something on the festival that should have been done before the festival. Rabbi Yehuda says, if one requires a wick of a particular length, he may cut it by burning it in a fire, but not by cutting it with a knife. I'm going to just read one quick comment from the Gemara about this Mishnah, and then I'll tell you what the law is. The Gemara, who is the Tana who taught that hollowing out a lamp is considered creating a vessel, even if it is not fired in a furnace? And Rav Yosef said that's Rabbi Meir, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the laws of ritual impurity. From when is an earthenware vessel susceptible to tuma, to ritual impurity? It is from when its work is completed, i.e., when the clay has been made into the form of a vessel. This is the statement. It is from when its work is completed, i.e., when the clay has been made into the form of a vessel. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehoshua says it is from when the vessel is fired in the furnace. So we're learning about what you can do on a festival from a related law about when an earthenware bowl, let's say, acquires the capacity to become ritually impure, tameh. And recall, when a metal bowl becomes tameh, like let's say it touched a human corpse, so it becomes tameh, it can be purified, right? It can go through fire or water, and it can become purified. A wooden bowl can be purified. An earthenware or ceramic bowl cannot be purified. So if it becomes ritually impure, at that point you just have to destroy it. Maybe you can use the shards for something because they no longer have the form of that bowl. It's something different. But you won't be able to purify it. However, according to Rabbi Meir, from when is it susceptible to ritual impurity? When it's done, according to all opinions, when it's done. But when is it considered done? When has that bowl come into existence? According to Rabbi Meir, when it looks like a bowl. According to Rabbi Yehoshua, When you take that bowl and put it in the furnace and it gets hard, like a clay pot that we're used to, then it's susceptible to impurity and not before. Who does the law follow? The completion of the labor of earthenware vessels. Earthenware vessels are not susceptible to ritual impurity until their manufacture has been completed, which is after they have been fired in a furnace, as stated by Rabbi Yehoshua, or according to other versions, as stated by Rabbi Yehuda. So may we create a lamp on a festival, which would seem like kind of like a temporary thing to hold the oil and the wick, and we haven't fashioned the vessel, at least according to the laws of ritual impurity. One may not hollow out a lamp. It is prohibited to fashion a lump of clay into the shape of a lamp in order to create a receptacle, because this is considered creating a vessel, as explained by Rashi. So even though it's not going to be susceptible to tuma until it gets fired in the furnace, you can't make such a vessel on the festival. You should find like maybe a soup bowl and turn that into a lamp. We skip down a little bit to the bottom of the A side of page 32. It was taught in the Mishna, and one may not cut a wick into two, right? Because cutting a wick is like forming the wick, right? Like you had a wick, and then you cut it in two. What did you do? You made two wicks, right? And so in a sense, you created two new objects, and you can't do that on the festival for the same reason you can't hollow out a lamp. It was taught in the Mishnah, and one may not cut a wick in two, but Rabbi Yehuda permits cutting it by means of fire. And the Gemara asks, well, what is different about cutting a wick with fire as opposed to with a knife? That one may not cut a wick with a knife. Is it because he thereby mends a vessel? If so, when one cuts it in the fire, he is also preparing a vessel for use, right? If he cut it with a fire, he took a wick, he burnt the middle, now he has two wicks, same result. He has two wicks. Why is it permitted with fire but prohibited with a knife? At least according to Rabbi Yehuda. Where am I? Okay, Rabbi Chia taught in an explanation, he cuts it by fire in the mouth of two candles. In other words, he does not simply cut a wick, but rather he inserts a long wick into two lamps, which he subsequently lights in the middle. This indeed leads to the formation of two separate wicks, but only as a result of kindling two lamps, right? So you only have one wick, you've got two lamps. Why would you want to cut the wick into two? Because you've got two lamps. But if you cut the wick in two, you've created two wicks, and like you've created new things, new utensils, new items on the festival. You can't do that. But if you take your long wick and stick it into the two candles and just light it in the middle, now what you've done is you lit two candles. That's permitted, and is ancillary to your real purpose, that the wick separated and the two lamps can now be separated and put on different sides of the room. Rav Natan bar Abba said that Rav said, one may mochet a wick on a festival. The term mochet was unknown, and the Gemara therefore asked, what is the meaning of the word mochet? And Rav Hanina bar Shalemia said, in the name of Rav, to remove the dark. In other words, it is permitted to remove the burnt charcoal section of the wick to make the lamp shine more brightly. Bar Kapara taught 6 matters were stated with regard to the laws of a wick on a festival, 3 of which are to be stringent and 3 of which are to be lenient. The 3 laws to be stringent are, one may not spin or twist it ab initio on a festival. In other words, you can't make a wick on a festival. If you're turning it, spinning it is the form that you need, so it's thick enough. You can't do that on the festival. And one may not singe it in fire before lighting it so that it will burn well. And one may not cut it into 2. You can light it, but singeing it is a form of sort of finishing the wick, making it take on the form that you want it to have. And that's not going to be permitted on the festival. And one may not cut it into 2, as we just discussed, with a scissors or a knife. The 3 laws to be lenient are, one may crush it by hand, as although it is prohibited to twist it into a wick, one may adjust its shape in an unusual manner. The normal thing to make a wick is twisting it. you need it to be kind of a certain shape. Okay, so you can crush it to get it into that shape. It'll work. It won't work as well as it might have, but this is a shinui, an adjusted method of doing something that would otherwise be prohibited, where you're acknowledging that it would be better not to finish forming this wick. I need the wick, so I'm going to do it in an unusual way, not in the weekday manner. We've talked a lot about that. And another leniency about a wick is one may soak it in oil so that it will later burn well. That's just preparing it, not, refashioning it. And one may cut it by fire in the mouth of 2 candles, as we just discussed. After citing this teaching in the name of Rav Natan bar Abba, the Gemara quotes a few more statements attributed to this same scholar. Since he is not mentioned often, Rav Natan's teachings are arranged together so that they can be remembered more easily. In other words, we've now brought in a teaching of Rav Natan bar Abba. And so now we're just taking a digression, has nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but having mentioned his name, we're going to do a few more teachings of Rav Natan bar Abba, and these are fascinating. Says Rav Natan bar Abba in the name of Rav, the wealthy Jews of Babylonia will descend to Gehenna. Okay, Gehenna is, it's not like hell in the sense it's not permanent. I guess a more modern word would be purgatory, right? Gehenna is the place where your soul goes to be purified, punished after living here. Usually it takes about a year or less, right? 11 months or less. But who knows what the sense of time is when you're talking about a soul in Gehenna. It's a place we all want to avoid at all costs. We want to live upright lives as best we can to avoid spending time in Gehenna. And now Rav Natan bar Abba is saying that the wealthy Jews of Babylonia, that's a big Jewish community, right? This is the Talmud Bavli. The Torah scholars of the Babylonian Jewish community are the ones who composed this Talmud. And now we're being told that the wealthy Jews of Babylonia are all going to Gehenna. Why would Rav Natan bar Abba say such a thing? Because they do not have compassion on others. And this is illustrated by incidents such as this. Shabtai bar Marinus happened to come to Babylonia. He requested their participation in a business venture to lend him money and receive half the profits in return, and they did not give it to him. Furthermore, when he asked them to sustain him with food, they likewise refused to sustain him. He said, "These wealthy people are not descendants of our forefathers, but they came from the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude." These were all the Egyptians who said, well, Egypt is doomed. These Jews obviously have a strong God. We're going with them. And so there were a lot of Egyptians that went into the desert along with the children of Israel and were there at Mount Sinai when the Torah was received. So according to this person, right, it must be this Shabtai bar Marinus who was, he was obviously very angry. They didn't invest in him and they didn't give him charity. And he says, these wealthy people are not descendants of our forefathers, but they came from the mixed multitude, as it is written, Deuteronomy 13:18, and show you compassion, and have compassion upon you, and multiply you, as he has sworn to your fathers, from which it is derived, anyone who has compassion for God's creatures, it is known that he is of the descendants of Abraham, our father. And anyone who does not have compassion for God's creatures, it is known that he is not of the descendants of Abraham, our father. Since these wealthy Babylonians do not have compassion on people, clearly they are not descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When we hear such a teaching, on one hand, we should listen and learn from it and make sure that if we are in a position to help people, to somebody who's starving, who needs a fish, we should give him a fish. Even better if we could give him a fishing pole, right? Invest in him so that he can start up a business venture and become self-sufficient. And even it's a for-profit business venture where he's willing to, split profits with the investors. Good lessons there. We should also note that when somebody gets angry at a whole community and damns the whole community because he had a negative experience, who knows what the particulars of that story were? Maybe this guy who went looking for investors was a jerk. Maybe his business plan made no sense. Maybe he was something very unpleasant. Maybe he had been helped many times, failed many times, and was given charity and then went drinking with it. I mean, who knows? I don't know anything about this guy. And I am not slandering him. I'm just saying there's many possibilities. He might be a great guy. He might not. I would need to know more. However, having said that, for whatever reason, this scholar, Rav Natan bar Abba, sought fit to transmit this teaching, and in the name of Rav, by the way. So, and they knew the wealthy Jews of Babylonia, so perhaps they thought that this guy had a legitimate pitch for, for investment and a legitimate request for charity, and he was ignored by those people, and we're still reading about it. God forbid that we should be such a community that would be remembered thousands of years later as lacking compassion and destined for Gehenna. And this is another teaching of Rav Natan bar Abba, who said in the name of Rav, whoever looks to the table of others for his sustenance, the world is dark for him. Everything looks bleak and hopeless for him. To him, for it is stated, he wanders abroad for bread. Where is it? He knows the day of darkness is ready at his hand. That's from Job 15:23. And Rav Chisda said, even his life is no life, as he receives no satisfaction from it. So you can see how the two teachings go together, that the wealthy people of Babylonia were destined for Gehenna because they lack compassion, and that somebody who is has fallen to a place in life where he's dependent on others for the bread on his table. He only eats, from the work of others. It's not a life. It's a dark life, terrible life for such a person. And so much better if we have any means at our disposal to elevate a person from that so they become self-sufficient. Give them charity at the moment that they're hungry, but help them to become self-sufficient. Now, in support of this last claim, the Gemara cites a Beitzah, which the sages taught. There are three whose lives are not lives, and they are as follows. One who looks to the table of others for his sustenance, and one whose wife rules over him, and one whose body is ruled by suffering. And the last one, easy to understand. Somebody whose health is bad, it's like that's all you can think about. We all take our health for granted until it goes wrong, and then that's all we think about. When he says his life is not life, they mean not that he's better off dead. That's never the case. But rather that it's not life as it's meant to be lived. It's not a realized life. When your health is suffering, like all you can think about is your health, and so that's why we pray with great conviction for anyone who's ill that they should be healed completely and speedily. And, one who's dependent on others, who can't make his own living, has no livelihood from his own work or savings, and has to depend on others, that's also a terrible, stressful way to live. And apparently one who is ruled by his wife, one whose wife rules over him, is put in that category. And some say even one who has only one robe. Since he cannot wash it properly, he suffers from lice and dirt. And the Gemara comments, and the first Tana, who did not include such a person in the list, it doesn't say for whose lives are not lives, why does he disagree that this person who only has one robe, right? A person who's so poor that he only has one article of clothing, right? What's the problem? He can never wash it, right? Modesty prevents him from ever taking off the robe and getting it clean. He has nothing else to wear while the robe is getting clean. So he's going to be always, in filth and even lice. But why does Tana disagree and say, well, no, this guy could have a decent life? Well, it is possible for him to examine his clothes and remove the lice, which would alleviate his suffering. And that concludes the discussion of Mishnah number 6. I'm almost done. Get your questions and comments in. I'm just going to read Mishnah number 7, and then we're going to stop. Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 4. One may not break earthenware on a festival, and one may not cut paper in order to roast salted fish on it. Earthenware shards or pieces of paper that have been soaked in water were placed on the metal surface or in the oven in which the fish was roasted so that it would not be burned by the heat. But note, you can't break earthenware to create shards that you might need, right? If it broke, it broke. But then those shards are nolad. Came into being on the festival. They weren't prepared for use on the festival. You can't use them. So double reason why you can't break the thing on purpose. You can't cut paper on a festival, and certainly not on Shabbos. And that's why strictly observant Jews, don't tear paper towels or even toilet paper on Shabbos or on a festival. What do? They put a box of Kleenex in the bathroom so that you're not tearing paper. For the same reason that you don't cut a wick, because then you would create two pieces of paper. And one may not sweep out anything that has fallen into an oven or a stove that interferes with the baking, such as plaster, but one may press down and flatten any accumulated dust and ashes at the bottom of the oven, which might prevent it from lighting properly. And one may not draw two barrels together in order to place a pot on top of them so that its contents will be cooked by a fire that is lit between the barrels. And one may not prop a pot that does not stand straight with a piece of wood in order to prevent it from falling. And similarly with a door. And one may not lead an animal with a stick in the public domain on a festival. And Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, permits it. I'm just going to read to you what the laws are about this Mishnah, not the Gemara. Breaking earthenware and tearing paper. It is prohibited to break earthenware or tear paper on a festival, even to roast something on them. So even for the purposes of food preparation, we don't break earthenware or tear paper on a festival. Don't tear, right? Not wax paper, not tin foil. You don't tear paper on a festival, even though it's for cooking. Sweeping out an oven. If it is possible to bake in an oven without sweeping it out, such that the bread will not be singed, one may not sweep it, as this is considered unnecessary handling. However, one may arrange its coals and ashes so that they do not touch the bread. One may not arrange the earth on the bottom because it is muktzah. If a piece of plaster fell into the oven and will cause the bread to be singed, then it's permitted to sweep it out in accordance with the opinion with the Mishna and Rav Nachman. And this is the law even if the plaster fell before the festival without one's knowledge. Propping up a pot. It is prohibited to prop a pot or a door with a piece of wood. Can you imagine why? Basically, you are engaging in construction, and that is why. Okay, going to questions and comments. Bill, one of my best professors, a wonderful scholar and religious leader, the Reverend Dr. J.E. Johnson, had a wonderful exegesis of where are you? Ayeka, I mentioned at the beginning, God asking Adam, where are you? It makes such a difference if we read that as an angry demand, where are you? Versus that of a worrying mother or father, where are you, for a missing child? Exactly, right? It's what's the word I'm looking for? He's teaching with it, right? It's a teaching statement, not a forlorn statement. God knows where he is. He's trying to teach Adam to think about where is he holding. Yosef, totally agree. We should all slow down when reading our Torah portions. Wonderful teaching tonight on Genesis, Sal. Thank you, and Shavua Tov. Thank you so much, Yosef. I really appreciate that. Ryan, I think the sages were on to something. In these modern times, we are accustomed to throw away what is not needed. I think what is not needed, other than the spiritual meaning, they were probably in the back of their minds conscious of the world. I mean, yeah, right? And this idea of, I guess it's an old saying, waste not, want not. It's something that the sages were definitely onto. And that does apply absolutely to the natural world, right? This idea, we also read in this Torah portion that everything in the world was given to the humans to rule over. Now, before you freak out, that might be like an unpopular notion these days. Yeah, the humans are in charge. The humans rule over the animal world, the natural world. Does that mean they can do anything they want with it? No. You rule over it. You exercise authority over it. And like any good authority, you have responsibility to it, to be its steward. And finally, Christo, probably going to spend a lot of time in Gehenna for how horrible I used to be many years ago. your awareness of being horrible in the past and mine, right, and all of us, because we've all behaved badly in our lives, is an important, crucial step in our teshuvah, right? So the fact that we've alerted ourselves to that we behaved badly when we were younger, that we strive to do better, and knowing that we're still going to make mistakes, but that we identify with a higher person, a higher ideal, and that we're going to keep working toward that, and we're going to show compassion on people, and we're going to listen to them and try to help them become self-sustaining if we can do so, etc. All part of the process. And hopefully we can do enough work, good work here in this world so we can avoid Gehenna. And if not, okay, then we'll have to pay a price in Gehenna. The beautiful thing of our understanding of the afterlife is, we're souls. We are eternal beings. So any finite amount of time that we spend in this world or even in Gehenna afterward, is just compared to the life of an eternal soul. So there's always a good silver line. Hold on, I'm getting a message. And Nina's reminding me of something beautiful, and thank you, Nina. We learned this not that long ago, right? I think in Yuma or in Sukkah, that our sins become merits under certain conditions. What are those? Right? So if we make it was in Yuma, right? The tract about Yom Kippur, that if we make an atonement because we're afraid of what's going to happen to us later, okay, then our intentional sins are going to be regarded as unintentional sins. But if we make teshuvah, if we make atonement because of love for God, for the Torah, for the opportunities that we've been given, for the idea that because we love God, we're going to, shower his creatures in love to the best of our ability. Not that we're going to love evil people, right? We also believe in justice and we will come down on injustice. But in terms of our own sins, if we make an atonement out of love for the Almighty and gratitude for the opportunities that we've been given, then our sins are actually transformed into merits. And yes, so then if you think about that, big sins that you've got could be transformed into merits. And in fact, I'll just finish with this. The Beitzah Rebbe once had an encounter on the street with a known corrupt judge. I think he was a Jew, maybe not. I'm not sure if that was relevant. But a judge who was known to be corrupt. Like, that's the worst thing that you can be, right? I mean, murder, idolatry, rape, those are the worst sins of all. But after that, corrupting justice. Because it makes everything else impossible. It makes a civil society impossible. It violates everything that the Torah stands for. The Torah says, tzedek, tzedek shall you pursue. Justice, justice shall you pursue. If the judges are corrupt, what kind of a society can you build? What did the Beitzah Rebbe say to this judge known to be corrupt? He said, I envy you. What? How could the Kedushas Levi, the great saintly Rebbe of Berditchev Levi Yitzhak, say to a corrupt judge, I envy you? He says, because when you make atonement, you have so many profound sins that can be converted into merits that you will walk around shining with goodness. What a beautiful way to look at sinners as somebody who has potential to be a saint. Have a terrific night. I look forward to seeing you again with God's help tomorrow, Sunday evening at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Shavua Tov.